I didn't ask questions, he didn't wait for answers. Kang Min-jae walked into that interrogation room, grabbed Nyla by the collar of her cleaning uniform, and slammed her against the wall hard enough to knock the breath clean out of her chest. His face was 6 inches from hers. His eyes were black and burning and completely without mercy. "Who sent you?" he said. Not a question. A sentence with teeth. Nyla couldn't speak. She was shaking so hard her knees were giving out beneath her, and the only thing keeping her upright was his fist twisted in her collar. She had woken up less than 2 hours ago in a bed she didn't recognize, beside a man she had never spoken to, wearing clothes she didn't remember putting on. And now the most feared criminal in South Korea had her pinned to a wall while cameras flashed outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, and the whole country watched. She hadn't done anything. She didn't know how she got there. She didn't even know what was happening. And he didn't care. If you've ever been blamed for something you didn't do, stripped of your name, your dignity, your right to explain yourself, then you already know exactly what Nyla Brooks felt standing in that room. This story is for you. Stay with us until the very end, because what comes next will shake you to your core. If this is your first time here, subscribe to the channel right now and hit that like button so this story finds someone who needs it. Drop your city and country in the comments. Let us see how far Nyla's story has traveled across this world. Now let's go back to where it all began. Nyla Brooks was not the kind of woman anyone noticed. That was not self-pity. That was just the truth of her life at 24 years old in a city like Seoul, where the skyline was all glass and money, and everyone on the street seemed to be walking somewhere important. Nyla walked to work. She rode the bus when she had enough in her transit card and walked the rest when she didn't. She wore sensible shoes that had started splitting at the left toe 3 weeks ago, and she hadn't had the extra budget to replace them yet. She cleaned buildings for a living. High-rises, mostly. Corporate towers where the lobbies were bigger than her entire apartment, and the bathrooms had heated floors and little rolled hand towels that someone like her was paid to replace every 40 minutes. She was good at the work. She was quiet. She was thorough. She didn't take things that weren't hers. And she showed up on time every single shift even when her back ached, and her hands were raw from the industrial cleaning solution that management was too cheap to replace with something gentler. She had been in Seoul for 14 months. She had come from Atlanta on a work visa that a staffing agency had arranged, chasing a vague idea that a fresh start in a different country might help her figure out what she actually wanted from her life. She was still figuring. In the meantime, she cleaned floors. Her best friend in the world was Camille Hart, who had come to Seoul 6 months before Nyla on a different work program, and had spent the entirety of those 6 months texting Nyla pictures of the food and insisting she come join her. When the visa had come through, Nyla had cried in the bathroom of the Waffle House where she worked the weekend morning shift, called Camille from the toilet stall, and they had screamed at each other across 12 time zones like they were teenagers. Camille was the kind of person who made a room louder just by existing in it. She laughed too hard, talked too fast, and had an opinion about absolutely everything. Nyla loved her completely and without reservation. They had been friends since the 7th grade. Camille was the person Nyla called when anything happened. Good, bad, terrifying, confusing. If the world ended, Nyla's first instinct would have been to call Camille. That detail would matter later. That detail would become the thing that broke her. But not yet. The night everything changed was a Tuesday. Nyla had pulled the late shift at Kang Tower, the 70-floor headquarters of Kang Industries, which was the legitimate face of what every person in Seoul's criminal underground knew was the Kang Syndicate. Min-jae kept the corporate structure immaculate. The lobbies had art on the walls, the employees had dental, the annual gala raised money for children's hospitals. And underneath all of it, threaded through the bones of every subsidiary and shell company and offshore account, was a criminal organization that had been running this city since before Min-jae was born. Nyla knew none of this. She knew Kang Tower paid better than the other contracts her agency held, that the security staff were terrifyingly serious, and that no one who cleaned there was ever permitted above the 42nd floor. She had cleaned the lobby and the mid-level conference rooms 18 times. She knew where the industrial trash bins were on each floor. She knew that the executive bathrooms on 30 had the good soap. The late shift ran from 10 in the evening until 4 in the morning. By midnight, Nyla's back was doing that specific thing it did when she'd been on her feet too long. A low, grinding ache that radiated down her left hip and made the last 2 hours of any shift feel like climbing something steep. She took her break at 12:15 in the small staff room near the service elevators on level 7. Camille had texted her earlier that evening to say she was dropping by the building. She had a friend who worked security there and could get her in the side entrance, and that she would bring Nyla an iced coffee from the place 2 blocks over that Nyla liked. The iced coffee was sitting on the break room table when Nyla arrived. Cup with a straw. Camille's handwriting on a post-it note. Drink it before it gets warm. Love you. Couldn't wait. Tell me everything tomorrow. Nyla drank it in 4 long pulls because she was thirsty and tired and it tasted right. The right amount of sweet, the right amount of bitter. The way that particular shop always made it. By 12:40, something was wrong. It started as warmth. Not heat, exactly. More like the sensation of being wrapped in something heavy, the way the air gets thick before a storm. Her vision didn't blur, but it softened around the edges. Her hands felt slow. She sat down on the break room bench and told herself she just needed a minute, that she was tired, that she'd been on her feet for 2 hours already, and her body was just reminding her of that. By 12:50, she couldn't stand up. The last thing she remembered with any clarity was the fluorescent light above her, buzzing faintly, and the cold surface of the bench against her cheek when her body finally gave up on staying upright. Then nothing. A total, seamless black. She woke up at 5:47 in the morning to the sound of a helicopter. That was the wrong sound for where she should have been. The break room on level 7 did not have helicopter traffic. Nyla opened her eyes, and the first thing she registered was light. Not fluorescent office light, but gray morning light coming through glass, a lot of glass, floor-to-ceiling glass on 3 sides of a room so large that her entire apartment could have fit inside it twice over. The second thing she registered was warmth against her back. A body. A person. She sat up so fast that the room tilted. She was in a bed. An enormous bed with sheets that felt nothing like any sheets she had ever touched, and beside her, still asleep, was a man she recognized from the photograph that hung in the lobby of the building she was paid to clean. Kang Min-jae. Nyla did not scream. She did something worse. She went completely still. Every muscle in her body leapt, while her brain ran through possibilities and discarded all of them because none of them made any sense. She was in her uniform. The cleaning uniform, the dark navy one with the agency's logo on the breast pocket. Her lanyard was still around her neck. Her left shoe was on. Her right shoe was 3 feet away near the foot of the bed. She had no memory. 5 hours of her life were simply gone. She moved toward the edge of the bed, slowly, without sound. Whatever had happened, she needed to not be here. She needed to leave. She needed to find a door and walk through it and call someone who could help her figure out what was going on. She had gotten both feet on the floor when Min-jae's eyes opened. He was awake in the way that people who live dangerous lives are awake. Completely, instantly, without the groggy transition that most people need. His eyes went from her face to the bed to the glass walls where, she now saw in pure horror, there were drones hovering. Multiple drones. And beyond the drones, the glow of camera flashes. And inside the building, the beep of what she realized was an alarm. Not a fire alarm, but the kind of security alarm that meant something had already gone terribly wrong. Min-jae sat up. His expression did not change. He looked at her with the particular stillness of a person calculating damage. Then he picked up his phone from the nightstand, looked at the screen, and set it back down with a movement so controlled it was frightening. "Who are you?" he said. His Korean was sharp and flat. Nyla's Korean was functional. She had been studying since she arrived, could hold a basic conversation, could understand about 70% of what was said to her if people spoke slowly. She understood every word he had just said. "My name is Nyla Brooks," she said. "I work the night cleaning shift. I don't know how I got here. I don't know what happened. I was on my break and then Stop." He stood up. He was already dressed, or dressed again, she couldn't tell. In dark trousers and a white shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, watching her with an expression that was not anger yet, but was standing directly next to it. "You were found in my private suite, on the morning of the most significant business announcement this company has ever made, with cameras positioned outside this window." He gestured toward the glass. Nyla looked. The cameras were everywhere. There were journalists down below on the plaza level, visible even from this height, and the drones were moving in patterns that looked deliberate, like they were broadcasting rather than searching. "I didn't do this," Nyla said. "No one does," Min-jae said. His security arrived 40 seconds later. 4 men through the suite door, hands at their sides, eyes tracking Nyla like she was a problem that needed to be categorized. One of them said something low and fast to Min-jae in Korean that Nyla caught fragments of. Footage, the 68th floor, compromised, already live. Min-jae looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, in English this time, so there was no possibility of misunderstanding, "Take her." They put her in a room with no windows on the 44th floor. Not roughly. No one touched her with violence yet. But there was no option to refuse. There was no hallway she could run down. There were men behind her and men in front of her, and a door that closed with the specific sound of something that locked from the outside. She sat in the chair they pointed her toward, and she tried to think. She was in trouble. That was clear. The kind of trouble that her cleaning uniform and her Atlanta background and her 14 months in Seoul had not equipped her for. Whatever had happened the night before, whatever she had been part of unknowingly, the man upstairs already believed he knew what it was. She pressed her hands flat on the table and breathed. The door opened 20 minutes later and Min-jae walked in alone. He sat across from her and folded his hands on the table and looked at her with a gaze that was perfectly, terrifyingly calm. "Tell me about Seo Jinwoo," he said. Nyla stared at him. "I don't know who that is." "Tell me about the cameras." "I don't know about any cameras." "Tell me how you got into my private suite." "I told you. I don't know. I was on my break on level 7. I had a coffee, and I felt sick, and I woke up in your... I don't know how I got there." Min-jae studied her for a moment. Then, "You are a very good liar." "I'm not lying. Every person in that lobby downstairs right now believes that you orchestrated an intimacy scandal to destroy this company's launch. Every financial partner watching this building believes the same thing. In the last 2 hours, we have lost $47 million in pre-market trading. By the time the markets open this morning, that number will be considerably larger." He leaned forward slightly. "Do you understand what I'm telling you?" "I understand what you're telling me," Nyla said, and her voice only broke a little. "I'm telling you that I didn't do it. I'm telling you that something happened to me last night that I cannot explain, and I need someone to listen to that and take it seriously." Min-jae stood up. "You'll stay here while my team continues its investigation." "You can't keep me here. I haven't done anything wrong." He paused at the door, looked back at her over one shoulder with an expression she couldn't read at all. "Wrong," he said quietly, "is a relative term in my world." The door locked again. Nyla sat in that chair and stared at the wall and tried to remember anything. Any image, any sensation, any fragment of the 5 missing hours, and came up with nothing. Just the fluorescent light, the cold bench, and Camille's handwriting on a post-it note. "Drink it before it gets warm." Outside in the gray morning Seoul sky, the drones kept filming. The scandal was already global. The woman in the cleaning uniform had become the most hated face in Korea before she'd had the chance to learn what she was being accused of doing. And somewhere in the city, a phone rang, and a voice on the other end said, "It worked. Move to the next phase." Nyla didn't know about that call. She didn't know about any of it yet. But she was already sitting inside the consequences. The door had been locked for 6 hours. Nyla knew because she had counted. Not with a watch. They had taken her phone during the initial search, patting down her uniform pockets with the brisk efficiency of people who did that kind of thing regularly, but by the light. The room had no windows, but there was a thin gap under the door, and the quality of the light coming through that gap had shifted twice. Morning to midday. Midday to something flatter and more indifferent. She had stopped pacing after the 3rd hour. Pacing burned energy she didn't have and accomplished nothing except making her feel like an animal in a box, which was more or less what she was. She sat in the chair. She put her hands flat on the table. She breathed. The hunger hit around hour 4, a deep, hollow ache below her ribs that she tried to ignore and couldn't. She had eaten nothing since the iced coffee the night before, and her body was now filing a formal complaint about that. Her mouth was dry. Her head had developed a slow, grinding throb behind her left eye that she recognized as a dehydration headache. She was prone to them, always had been, could feel the specific quality of it, like a screw being turned incrementally tighter. She did not ask for water. She was not going to give anyone in this building the satisfaction of watching her ask for anything. The door opened at what she estimated was early afternoon. Not Min-jae this time. A man she hadn't seen before, mid-40s, square jaw, the flat eyes of someone who spent his professional life managing problems. He set a plastic bottle of water and a wrapped sandwich on the table without making eye contact, then stood near the door with his hands clasped in front of him. "Mr. Kang will be available shortly," he said, in English, carefully neutral. Nyla looked at the water, looked at the sandwich, looked at him. "What's your name?" she asked. He blinked, like the question was not in his prepared script. "Park." "Park," she said. "I've been in this room for 6 hours. I haven't done anything wrong. I want to know what my legal status is right now. Am I being detained? Am I under arrest? Because if I'm neither of those things, I'm walking out that door." Park looked at her with an expression that was almost, not quite, but almost, something human. Then he said, "Mr. Kang will be available shortly," in exactly the same tone, and returned his gaze to the wall behind her head. Nyla opened the water. She drank half of it without stopping because her body needed it regardless of what her pride wanted. She did not touch the sandwich. Min-jae arrived 11 minutes later. She had counted those too. He looked different from the morning. Not worse, exactly, but compressed. The way a person looks when they've spent several hours absorbing damage and are now operating on something tighter and more combustible than regular anger. His shirt was still the same white one. There was a smudge near his left cuff that looked like ink. He sat down across from her, and for a moment neither of them said anything. "Your agency has been contacted," he said finally. "They've suspended your contract pending investigation." The sentence landed like something physical. Nyla felt it move through her chest and settle somewhere unpleasant. "On what grounds?" she said. "Breach of facility security protocols, unauthorized access to restricted floors." "I didn't access anything unauthorized. I was on level 7. Whatever happened after that was not my doing." "Your keycard was used to access the executive elevator at 1:04 in the morning." Nyla stared at him. "That's not possible." "We have the log." "Then someone else used my keycard. Someone took it while I was unconscious, or they cloned it, or I was unconscious. Do you understand that? Something was in that coffee and I went down. I didn't walk myself up to your suite." Min-jae watched her. The stillness of him was infuriating in a way she couldn't quite articulate. Not the stillness of someone who was calm, but the stillness of someone who had already made a decision and was simply waiting for the conversation to finish proving him right. "The coffee," he said. "My friend brought it. She left it in the break room. I drank it, and 20 minutes later I couldn't stand up." "Your friend's name?" Nyla hesitated. One beat. She didn't know why. Some instinct she couldn't name. Something that moved in the space between what she knew and what she felt. "Camille Hart." He wrote it down. Old-fashioned, with a pen and a small notebook that he produced from his jacket pocket. She watched his hand move across the page and felt a surge of something that was not quite fear, but lived near it. "I'm going to need my phone back," she said. "I need to call someone." "Your phone is being examined. That's my private property. Everything in this building is subject to— I don't care what it's subject to." Her voice came out harder than she planned. "I am a person. I have rights. You cannot keep me in this room without cause, and you cannot go through my phone without a warrant, and I don't care how much money you have or what your name means in this city. You do not get to make me disappear." The silence that followed was the kind that had weight to it. Min-jae looked at her for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "You have a great deal of nerve for someone in your position. And you have a great deal of assumptions for someone who has exactly zero proof." Something moved across his face. It was there and gone in under a second, and she couldn't identify what it was. Not quite surprise, not quite recalculation, something between them. "You'll be released this evening," he said. "You'll be escorted from the building. You will not contact anyone at Kang Industries. You will not speak to the press. If you violate either of those conditions, the legal consequences will be—" "Are you serious right now?" It wasn't a question. "You're threatening me. After everything I just told you, you're sitting here threatening me." "I'm clarifying your situation." "My situation," Nyla said, and she heard her own voice drop into something quieter and more dangerous than shouting would have been, "is that I am a 24-year-old woman who was drugged in your building, woke up in your bed without any memory of how I got there, and is now being held in a room while my job gets taken away and my phone gets searched. That is my situation." And the fact that you are sitting there talking to me about legal consequences tells me everything I need to know about what kind of man you are. Min-jae stood up. His jaw was set. Park will escort you out at 6. I know you didn't do this to me on purpose, she said to his back. He stopped, didn't turn around. But I also know that you know something happened to me. And you're choosing not to care about that because caring about it would make your situation more complicated. So you're going to throw me out and let the world keep thinking I'm whatever they've decided I am, and that's going to be on you, not on me, on you. He left. The door locked. Nyla put her face in her hands and breathed through the shaking. She got out at 6:15. Park walked her to a service exit. Not the front, obviously, not where the cameras and the journalists and the remaining drones were still clustered in the plaza, and handed her a small envelope that contained her phone, her transit card, and a document she didn't have time to read before the door closed behind her. She was on the street. It was cold. The evening had that particular Seoul cold that came off the Han River and moved through clothing like it wasn't there. She stood on the pavement behind the building, and for a moment she couldn't make herself move in any direction because every direction felt equally impossible. She looked at her phone. 11 missed calls. 2 from her agency. 1 from a number she didn't recognize. 8 from Camille. She called Camille back. Oh, thank God, Camille said, picking up on the first ring. Nye, where are you? I've been losing my mind. What happened? I saw the news and I need you to come get me, Nyla said. I'm behind Kong Tower on the east side, the service exit. I'm coming right now. Are you okay? Are you hurt? Just come. Camille was there in 18 minutes, arriving in the small second-hand car she'd bought 3 months ago with her savings. She got out before she'd fully stopped and came around the hood at a near run and wrapped both arms around Nyla without saying anything, just held on. Nyla stood in the hug and felt something in her chest crack open. She didn't cry. She was too tired to cry and too angry and too hollowed out. But she held on to Camille's arms and breathed and let herself have that 1 minute of feeling like something other than a problem someone was trying to manage. Let's get you home, Camille said. Come on. They drove back to Nyla's apartment in near silence. Camille kept reaching across to touch her arm, kept saying things like, you don't have to talk and we'll figure this out, and that man is going to be sorry. Nyla responded in single syllables and stared at the city moving past the passenger window and tried to catalog everything she knew for certain, which was not a long list. At the apartment, Camille made tea. She knew where everything was, had been in this apartment dozens of times, and sat with Nyla at the small kitchen table while Nyla told her what had happened. All of it. The coffee, the break room, waking up, the interrogation, the 6 hours in the locked room. Camille listened. Her face moved through several expressions: horror, disbelief, fury. She reached across the table and gripped Nyla's hand. Someone drugged you, she said. Someone literally drugged you and staged that whole thing. Yes. Who would do that? I don't know. Min-jae mentioned a name, Seo Jin-woo. Do you know that name? A pause. Small. Almost nothing. No, Camille said. Should I? I don't know. He seems to think it's connected to a rival, someone trying to destroy his company launch. And they used you to do it. Camille shook her head. Her jaw was tight. Those people are animals, Nye, using an innocent person like... She stopped, pressed her lips together. You need a lawyer. Tomorrow, first thing. Someone who handles these situations. I can't afford a lawyer. I'll help you. We'll figure it out. They talked for another hour. Camille stayed until nearly 10, then hugged her again at the door and told her to lock everything and call if anything happened during the night. Nyla locked the deadbolt and the chain. She showered for a long time, standing under water as hot as she could stand it, trying to wash the feeling of that room off her skin. She did not sleep well. She lay in her own bed and stared at the ceiling and replayed the morning in fragments. The helicopter sound, the light, Min-jae's face opening into that instant, total wakefulness. The way he'd looked at her in the interrogation room. Not like a person, like a liability. She thought about what he'd said. Your keycard was used at 1:04, which meant someone had her keycard, which meant someone had been in the break room while she was unconscious, had gone through her pockets, had taken the card and used it, and presumably returned it, because Park had given it back to her in the envelope. The card was back, but someone had made a copy, or someone had her card and put it back, which meant they had been close to her body while she was unconscious and helpless. and that thought produced a cold, crawling sensation across her shoulder blades that she had to actively breathe through. She was still awake at 2 a.m. when her phone started. Not calls, notifications. Her name was trending on Korean social media. The photos from the drones, her face at the window of Min-jae's suite, grainy but unmistakable in her navy cleaning uniform, the Kang Tower logo on her badge clearly legible, were everywhere. News sites, entertainment sites, financial sites. The headlines were varied but all arrived at the same destination. Cleaning staff member stages intimacy scandal to sabotage Kong Industries launch. A tabloid had already dug up her work visa application. Another had found her old social media, dormant for 2 years, mostly pictures of food and her niece, and was mining it for evidence of premeditation. Her phone rang. The unknown number from the missed calls list. She answered because at 2 a.m., with her name trending for reasons that could destroy her life, she had lost the capacity to be cautious. Miss Brooks. A man's voice, smooth and carefully professional, with a Korean accent that had edges of something else she couldn't place. My name is not important right now. What's important is that you're awake and listening. Who is this? Someone who knows what happened to you last night, all of it, in detail. Her hand tightened on the phone. Then tell the police. The police in this city answer to people who would prefer this story go a certain direction. I'm calling because you deserve to know the shape of what you've walked into. A pause. You were selected, Miss Brooks. Not randomly. You were chosen because you had no connections to either organization, because your background was clean enough to be credible and obscure enough to be disposable. Someone studied you. Your shifts, your break schedule, your relationship with your friend. The air in the room went cold. What friend? The one who brought you coffee. The line went dead. Nyla sat in the dark of her apartment for a long time after that. She held the phone in both hands and stared at Camille's name in her recent calls. The laughing, furious, fiercely loyal Camille who had held her in the parking lot. The Camille who had said those people are animals. The Camille who had paused, just a fraction of a second, barely anything, almost nothing, when Nyla had said the name Seo Jin-woo. She did not call. Not yet. She needed to think. She needed to be certain. She was not certain. She was only terrified in a new direction. 3 days passed in a kind of suspended misery. The agency sent a formal termination notice by email. The document Min-jae's people had given her turned out to be a non-disclosure agreement she had no intention of signing. She stayed inside, ate crackers and instant noodles, and watched her name circulate through the news cycle like something that couldn't be stopped. Camille called every day. Camille was concerned, supportive, relentlessly present. She brought groceries on the second day and sat at the kitchen table and said all the right things and touched Nyla's hand at all the right moments. And Nyla smiled and nodded and kept her face completely still while something in her abdomen knotted tighter and tighter. She started paying attention, not in the way she had before, not just absorbing Camille's presence like comfort, but watching, cataloging. The way Camille's eyes moved when Nyla mentioned Min-jae's ongoing investigation. The way she always arrived, knowing things that hadn't been in the news yet, little details. The kind of details that felt like information rather than intuition. On the third night, Camille left the apartment at 8 p.m., and Nyla, on an impulse she couldn't fully explain even to herself, waited 2 minutes and then stood outside her own front door in the hallway, listening. The hallway was quiet. The building had thin walls and thinner floors. Camille's voice came up from the stairwell landing 1 floor below, where she had apparently stopped to make a call instead of going all the way outside. Nyla stood completely still and listened. She couldn't hear every word. Acoustics in the stairwell bounced and swallowed, but she heard enough. She heard Camille's voice shed every trace of the warmth that had been in it for 3 days and become something flat and operational. She heard the words, "She doesn't know anything yet," and the NDA, and then, clear as anything, a laugh. A short, satisfied, slightly giddy laugh that sounded like someone who had pulled off something difficult and was still pleased about it. And then, in a murmur that was lower and harder to catch but unmistakable, Jin-woo says we move to the next phase once she signs. Nyla walked back into her apartment. She closed the door behind her. She sat down on the kitchen floor because her legs had stopped working properly and the chair was too far away. She thought about 7th grade. She thought about the toilet stall in the Atlanta Waffle House and the screaming across 12 time zones. She thought about the iced coffee and the post-it note and drink it before it gets warm in Camille's handwriting. She thought about all of it with the particular crystalline clarity of someone whose world has just rearranged itself into a shape they can never go back from. Camille had done it. Camille had drugged her. Camille had put something in that coffee and handed her over. Handed her, the girl she had known since 7th grade, to people who needed a body to destroy a man's life, and then had come back to watch the wreckage and make sure it held. Nyla pressed the back of her hand against her mouth and held herself absolutely still for a long moment. Then she straightened up. She got off the floor. She went to the cabinet above the refrigerator where she kept the small folder of documents she'd brought from Atlanta. Lease copies, visa paperwork, her social security card in a Ziploc bag. And she took out the blank notepad she kept there for grocery lists. She started writing down everything she remembered, every detail, every moment from the break room to the stairwell, dates, times, the name Seo Jin-woo, the voice on the phone, Camille's words reconstructed as precisely as she could manage. If she was going to survive this, she needed evidence. She needed a record. She needed to be more careful than she had ever been about who she trusted and what she showed. The knock came at her door at 9:47 p.m., 3 sharp impacts, not Camille's knock. Camille always did 2 light taps and then opened it because Nyla had given her a key weeks ago. She went to the door, looked through the peephole. 4 men in dark coats, and behind them, unmistakable even through the fisheye lens, the compressed, controlled face of Kang Min-jae. Nyla stepped back from the door. Her heart was in her throat. Her notepad was on the kitchen table with everything she knew written on it in plain sight. The knock came again, harder this time. And then Min-jae's voice coming through the door with a quietness that was more frightening than shouting would have been. "Open the door, Miss Brooks. I'm not going to ask twice." She looked at the notepad, looked at the door, looked at the window, which was 3 floors up, and led nowhere good. She had exactly no good options. She had one bad option and several catastrophic ones. She crossed the apartment, picked up the notepad, and pushed it behind the refrigerator into the gap where it would not be immediately visible. Then she went to the door, unfastened the deadbolt, and opened it. Min-jae stepped inside without being invited. His men stayed in the hallway, but their presence filled the doorframe. He looked around her apartment with the particular efficiency of someone who is assessing rather than observing, then looked at her. He looked terrible. Not physically. He was still the same ruthlessly put-together person he'd been 3 days ago. But around his eyes, in the set of his jaw, there was something that had been under enormous pressure for 72 hours and was still being held together by sheer discipline. "Sit down," he said. "In my own apartment," Nyla said. "You don't get to tell me to sit down." He looked at her for a moment. Then, with what appeared to be genuine effort, he said, "Please." She stayed standing. "What do you want?" "My advisors have determined," he said, choosing each word with visible care, "that the most effective way to stabilize the company's position and neutralize the scandal is a public demonstration of resolution between us." "I don't know what that means." "It means," he said, and she watched something move behind his eyes that might have been shame or might have been something harder to name, "that we need to get married." The silence in the apartment was total. "No," Nyla said. "Miss Brooks, no, that is not happening. That is the most insane thing anyone has ever said to me, and I have been having a spectacularly insane week. I understand that this is—" "No, you don't." She stepped toward him, and his men in the hallway shifted, but she ignored them. "You had me locked in a room for 6 hours. You took my job. You let the entire country call me a criminal. And now you're standing in my apartment telling me I need to marry you to fix your problem? You need to leave." Min-jae didn't move. He stood with his hands at his sides and looked at her with an expression that had stopped pretending to be anything other than what it was: desperate. A man who was running out of options and knew it. "If you refuse," he said very quietly, "the people who did this will try again. Whatever was done to you. They're not finished. You walking away from this doesn't end it for you. It ends your ability to have any protection from what comes next." It was the wrong thing to say and the right thing to say simultaneously. Nyla recognized the truth in it, even while she hated him for using it. "You're threatening me again," she said. "I'm telling you the truth. For the first time, possibly." I'm telling you that you are in the middle of something that doesn't care about your innocence. And the only position that gives you any safety is inside mine. Inside yours, she repeated flatly. You want me inside your protection, in your house, as your wife. As a public gesture, with terms, written, legal, enforceable terms. She looked at him for a long time. The kitchen was small. He was too large for it, not physically, but in the way that some people occupy space differently, fill rooms with a pressure that other people have to push against. She had been pushing against him for 3 days from across the city. Being this close made that harder. If I say yes, she said, and I am not saying yes, I am asking a hypothetical. What exactly are the terms? He reached into his jacket, produced a folded document, set it on her kitchen table. Nyla picked it up, unfolded it, read the first page. She read it twice. Her face didn't move. You had this drafted already, she said. Yes. You were fairly certain I'd agree. I was certain, he said, that you are smart enough to recognize that you have no good alternatives. She set the document down, looked at him, looked at the hallway behind him where his men waited with their hands at their sides and their faces like closed doors. She thought about Camille's voice in the stairwell. She doesn't know anything yet. The next phase. Whatever that meant. Whatever was coming for her if she stayed out here alone with no job and no allies and her name already destroyed. She thought about the notepad behind the refrigerator. The evidence she was starting to build, the thing she was not going to give up and was not going to let them use her to bury. I have conditions, she said. Min-jae said nothing, waiting. My own room, locked from my side. No one enters without my permission, including you. I keep my phone. I come and go as I choose within whatever security parameters you need. And when this is over, when the company is stable and the scandal is dead, I walk away with my name clean and my record clear, documented, legally binding. He looked at her for a moment, agreed. I'm not done. If I find out that you knew more than you've told me about what happened to me, about who did it, about any of it, the agreement ends immediately and I go to every journalist outside your building with everything I know. Something in his expression shifted. It was not quite respect. It was not quite anything she had a name for. Agreed, he said again. Nyla looked at the document on the table, at the pen he was now holding out toward her. She took the pen. Her hand was steady when she signed, which was the most surprising thing about the entire night, that her hand could be that steady while everything inside her was something close to ruin, while the best friend she had ever had was 1 floor below her in a stairwell, reporting her movements to the man who had arranged to destroy her life, while the man standing in her kitchen asking her to be his wife was the same man who had slammed her against a wall and told her she was a very good liar. She signed. She put the pen down. When? She said. 4 days, Min-jae said. The ceremony will be private. The announcement will not be. He took the document, folded it, put it back in his jacket. He turned toward the door, and then he stopped. The same way he'd stopped in the interrogation room with his back to her, and said without turning around, I don't know yet what happened to you, but I will find out. He left. His men followed. The door closed. Nyla stood in her kitchen in the silence and understood, with a clarity that was almost physical, that she had just crossed a line she could not uncross, that the life she had been living was over, and whatever came next was something she had no map for, and that the only person she had been counting on in this city had handed her to an enemy with a smile and 8 missed calls. She was alone. She was broke. She was about to marry a man who had once grabbed her by the collar and asked who sent her. And somewhere in this apartment, behind the refrigerator, a notepad held the beginning of the only weapon she had. The wedding took 4 days to arrange and 40 minutes to perform. Nyla wore a dress she had never chosen. It was ivory, structured at the shoulders, with a neckline that someone on Min-jae's staff had deemed appropriate for the photographs that would be released to the press within the hour. A stylist had arrived at the guest suite at 7 in the morning with a rolling rack of options and the business-like efficiency of someone who understood that this was a transaction dressed as a ceremony and had treated it accordingly. Nyla had pointed at the least elaborate option and sat in the chair in front of the mirror and let them do what they came to do. She looked at herself when they were finished and did not recognize the woman in the glass. The hair, the makeup, the dress.
All of it was someone else's vision of who she should be in this moment. She was just the body inside it. The ceremony was in a small room on the 32nd floor of Kang Tower, which was the kind of detail that told her everything about how Min-jae thought about this arrangement. Not a chapel, not a hotel ballroom.
A conference room that had been cleared and decorated with white flowers, and a justice of the peace who did not make eye contact with either of them. 4 witnesses. 2 of Min-jae's lawyers, Park, and a woman from Min-jae's PR team who photographed everything with the methodical focus of someone building a press kit. Min-jae stood beside her in a dark suit. He looked exactly like himself, contained, composed, giving nothing away to the room. He did not reach for her hand until the justice of the peace indicated it was time to, and when he did, his grip was formal. Correct. A hand that knew it was being photographed. Nyla said the words she was asked to say. She signed the documents she was asked to sign. When the justice of the peace said she could be kissed by her husband, Min-jae turned toward her and pressed his mouth briefly, neutrally, against her cheekbone. The PR woman's camera clicked. That was the marriage. 40 minutes later, she was in a car moving through Seoul traffic toward a neighborhood she had never been to, watching the city slide past the window and trying to locate somewhere inside herself the version of Nyla Brooks who had woken up 6 days ago with calluses on her hands and a splitting left shoe, and the straightforward misery of an ordinary hard life. That Nyla seemed very far away. That Nyla had problems she could name. The Kang estate was outside the city proper, a compound realistically, though the word compound made it sound harsher than the manicured reality of it. Stone walls with ivy growing across them. A gate that required 2 separate access confirmations. Grounds that went back further than she could see from the car, with paths through what looked like a formal garden, and beyond it, trees. The house itself was 3 stories of steel and glass and dark stone, modern in a way that was aggressive about it, the kind of architecture that was designed to communicate that whoever lived inside it had won. She was given a room on the 2nd floor. True to the written terms, it had a lock on the inside. She tested it twice before she put her bag down. The room was large, larger than her apartment, larger than any space she had personally occupied. The bed was enormous, and the linens were white, and there was a window that looked out over the garden, and beyond it, the wall, and beyond that the road, and beyond that the rest of the world, which was currently calling her a criminal and a seductress, and a woman who had used her body to destroy a man's legacy. She sat on the edge of the bed in the ivory dress and pressed both palms against the mattress and breathed. She was in. She was inside the walls now. And being inside the walls, she had told herself in those 4 days between the kitchen and the ceremony, meant she had access. It meant she could look. It meant she was no longer sitting in her apartment watching her name burn from the outside with no tools and no allies and nowhere to go. She still had the notepad. She had transferred its contents to a notes app on her phone, encrypted, before she'd packed. The original she had folded into the spine of a paperback novel she'd brought with her, one of 7 books in her bag, where it looked like nothing. She had a plan. It was not a good plan. It was the plan of someone with no resources working with the only thing she had, which was patience and the understanding that people who believed they had already won tended to stop being careful. What she had not planned for was Min-jae. Not Min-jae the mafia here, not Min-jae the businessman whose company had lost $100 million in 3 days because of a scandal built around her sleeping body. That version she had prepared for. She had prepared for the cold, contained, threatening man who had grabbed her collar and had her locked in rooms. She had not prepared for the version that knocked on her door at 9 that evening, waited for her to open it, and stood in the hallway holding a tray with food on it. "I assumed you hadn't eaten," he said. She looked at the tray. Rice, soup, a small dish of something she didn't recognize, a glass of water, and a glass of something amber she assumed was tea. "You could have had someone bring that," she said. "Yes." A silence. She stepped back from the door, and he came in and set the tray on the small desk by the window. He didn't sit. He stood near the desk with his hands at his sides in that way he had, the way that read like control but was starting to read like something else to her. Like a person who had learned very young that stillness was the safest way to occupy a room. "The announcement went out an hour ago," he said. "The initial response from the markets is stabilizing." "That's good," she said. "For you. For both of us. The terms of the agreement depend on the company's stability."
I know what the terms say. He nodded. He looked at the window, at the garden below, at nothing in particular. I know this isn't what you wanted, he said, and the flatness of it, the way he said it without apology or softness, just as a statement of observable fact, was somehow more tolerable than sympathy would have been. No, she agreed. It isn't. If you need anything within the house, tell Park. He'll see to it. I need my mornings, she said. I need to be able to walk in the garden without an escort. He looked at her. I'll speak to the security team. I also need access to the internet without it being monitored. His expression didn't change, but something behind it did. I'll have to discuss that with... It's in the terms. Personal privacy within the household. That includes my communications. He held her gaze for a moment. I'll see to it. He left. She ate the food, which was good, genuinely, frustratingly good, made by someone who knew what they were doing, and sat at the desk afterward and began the slow work of figuring out what she was actually inside. The next week was a strange, suspended kind of education. She learned the house, not in the way of a guest, mapping exits for comfort, but methodically, the way she had learned the floors of Kong Tower on her cleaning shifts, understanding where things were kept and why, and who moved through which spaces at which hours. The estate had 17 staff members who lived on site, and 11 who came in during the day. Security operated in 8-hour rotations with a change at 6 a.m., 2 p.m., and 10 p.m. The East Wing was Min-jae's personal space and was effectively inaccessible. She had no reason to try and every reason not to draw attention by attempting it. The library on the ground floor was unlocked at all times and rarely occupied. The garden in the morning, before 8, was hers alone. She used the garden every day, not just for air but for thinking, for the particular quality of thought that came from physical movement without any walls around it. She walked the same path every morning, the one that curved around the edge of the formal garden toward the old stone wall at the back. And she thought about what she knew and what she still needed to know. She thought about Camille constantly, with a grief that was physical, that sat in her sternum like something wedged there. Not anger, not yet, not in those first days. Something more complicated and more painful, the specific anguish of understanding that the person you had trusted completely had not made a mistake or been pressured into a corner, but had made a deliberate choice, had picked up a phone and accepted money or loyalty or whatever Seo Jin-woo had offered, and had then sat across a kitchen table from Nyla and held her hand and looked her in the eyes. She had to be careful with that grief. She couldn't let it slow her down. In the evenings, Min-jae sometimes knocked, always with food, which she found bizarre and told him so on the 4th evening. You don't have to do that, she said. You're not eating with the staff. I'm not comfortable eating with the staff yet. Then someone has to bring you food. You're not someone who brings people food. You're the person who has someone bring food. He considered this with the gravity he seemed to apply to everything. I find, he said, that I'm not sure how to behave in this situation, so I'm defaulting to practical. Nyla looked at him for a moment. It was the most honest thing he had said to her since the interrogation room, and it was honest in a way that was clearly not comfortable for him. The words had come out a little roughly, like something that had been turned over and over before being released. Practical is fine, she said. He nodded. He started to leave. Wait, she said. He stopped. What do you know about Seo Jin-woo? I mean, actually know. Not what you're willing to tell me. What do you know? He turned around. His expression was careful. Why? Because I'm inside these walls now. Because whatever's happening out there with your investigation is also happening to me, and I have a right to know what's being done with the situation I'm in the middle of. He stood in the doorway, and she could see him running calculations. What to give her, what to withhold, where the line was between keeping her manageable and giving her enough that she stayed cooperative. Seo Jin-woo, he said finally, has been trying to take this company for 3 years, not through competition, through dismantlement. He's removed 2 of my board members through manufactured scandals. He's twice attempted to compromise our overseas supply chain. What happened to you was consistent with his methodology. Use an innocent person, make the damage look organic, ensure that even after the truth comes out, there's enough residual doubt to sustain the narrative. He picks people with no connections, Nyla said. Min-jae looked at her. Yes. And he had someone on the inside, someone who knew the building, the shift schedules, which staff member would be alone long enough. A pause.
His jaw tightened slightly. We're investigating that. It was my friend, Nyla said. Camille Hart. I have reason to believe she's connected to Jin Woo's organization. I overheard her on a phone call 3 days after, before you came to my apartment. She didn't know I was listening. The silence in the room changed quality. Min-jae looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before, not in any of their interactions, something that might have been the beginning of reassessment. You didn't mention this before, he said. You didn't ask me before. You told me to sit down and sign things. Another silence, longer this time. I'll have my team look into it. I want to know what they find, she said. Everything they find. That's my condition for any further cooperation with whatever public-facing performance this arrangement requires. He held her gaze for a moment. Then, agreed. That was the first real exchange they had. Not the interrogation, not the kitchen with the documents, but this. Two people who were trapped in adjacent corners of the same problem, each holding information the other needed, beginning the tentative and deeply uncomfortable work of figuring out whether they could be useful to each other. She did not trust him. She was not going to trust him. But useful was different from trusted, and she had learned very quickly in this life that you worked with what you had. What she had was 2 weeks of careful observation, a growing map of the estate's operations, and a phone that Min-jae's team had, apparently genuinely, left unmonitored. She used it carefully, in short bursts, on different networks when she could manage it. She was looking for Seo Jin-woo. Not in any way that would be visible, not social media searches or news archive dives, but the slow, lateral kind of looking, the kind she'd learned to do in the 14 months of navigating a country whose language and customs she was still learning, finding the shape of something from its edges. What she found, gradually, over those 2 weeks, was worse than she had expected. Jin-woo wasn't just a rival. He was methodical in a way that felt personal, obsessive. The 2 board members Min-jae had mentioned, she found traces of both cases in old financial news, the kind of reporting that was careful and incomplete in a way that suggested deliberate suppression. Both men had ended up publicly disgraced over financial irregularities. Both had been cleared years later in proceedings that received almost no press coverage. The pattern was clear if you looked for it. Jin-woo didn't destroy people quickly. He set them up, let the damage compound, and then came back for the company after the leadership was already weakened. She was part of that pattern. She was the latest instrument in a campaign that had been running for years. She was sitting with that understanding in the library on a Thursday afternoon with rain against the windows when Park appeared in the doorway with the particular expression of someone delivering information they would prefer not to. "Mr. Kang would like you in the East Wing," he said. Now. She had never been in the East Wing. She followed Park through the house and through a connecting hallway and into a space that was unmistakably Min-jae's, sparse, functional, with the same aggressive modernity as the house's exterior but lived in small ways. A jacket over a chair back, an open book face down on the coffee table, a coffee cup that had been there long enough to leave a ring. Min-jae was standing near the window with his back to her. There was another man in the room she hadn't seen before. Older, 60s, with the build of someone who had spent decades in physical work and the eyes of someone who had spent decades watching people lie. "Sit down," Min-jae said. Not a command this time. Something closer to a request. She sat. The older man looked at her with an expression that was not unkind but was not warm. "This is Director Shin," Min-jae said. "He runs the internal intelligence operations." Director Shin nodded at her. She nodded back. "We found something," Min-jae said. He turned away from the window. His face was different. The compressed quality she'd seen in the interrogation room, but worse now, worn through. "It took longer than it should have because the routing was sophisticated. But we pulled the financial transfers from the past 8 months and traced them backward through 4 different shell accounts." He stopped. Looked at her directly. "Camille Hart has been on Seo Jin-woo's payroll for 11 months, he said. "She was recruited 2 months before she convinced you to come to Seoul." The air left the room, or it felt that way. Like the pressure changed, like the space around her compressed into something thinner and harder to breathe. "She recruited you," Director Shin said. His voice was flat, professional, giving her the information without ornamentation. "The visa referral, the staffing agency, your specific placement at Kang Tower. All of it was arranged through a series of intermediaries that trace back to Jinwoo's organization. You were placed in that building 14 months ago because they were already planning this. 14 months. Nyla heard the number and held it. 14 months ago, she had been in Atlanta in a Waffle House bathroom crying because she'd gotten a visa to a new country and she thought it meant something was starting. She had called Camille screaming across 12 time zones because Camille was the person she called when good things happened. Camille had already been paid. Camille had already made the call to whoever arranged the next step. Camille had already been working against her for 2 months before that phone call, had listened to her scream with happiness into the phone, and had said all the right things, and had known, the whole time, what she was setting in motion. "The coffee," Nyla said. Her voice came out very flat. "She didn't just bring me coffee the night it happened. She planned this for over a year." "Yes," Director Shin said. "She's my best friend," Nyla said. Neither man responded. There was nothing to respond to. "Since 7th grade," Nyla said. It wasn't for them. It was a thing she needed to say out loud to make it real, to make it sit outside her body instead of inside it where it was currently doing structural damage. She looked at her hands. They were very still in her lap. She noted this with a kind of detachment, that she was holding herself that still, that her body had apparently decided that movement was not possible right now, and had issued a temporary suspension of normal physical function. "There's more," Min-jae said. She looked up at him. He glanced at Director Shin, and something passed between them. A hesitation, a calculation, the kind that preceded information being given to someone who cannot be protected from it. "The transfers," Director Shin said, "also flagged a secondary set of payments, more recent, starting approximately 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago was just before the scandal, just before the coffee. The secondary payments," he continued, "were not to Hart. They were to a technical contractor, someone with access to building systems. We've now identified that this person installed a secondary drug delivery system in the Kang Tower ventilation for the executive floors." He paused. "The drug that was in your coffee was a secondary dose, a reinforcement. The initial exposure had already begun through the air system on floor 67 during the 4 hours before your shift ended." Nyla stared at him. "What?" "You were being dosed before the coffee," he said. "The coffee accelerated it. The plan was engineered to ensure complete memory loss over a specific window and to ensure that the body's physical responses during that window would be—" He stopped, chose his next word with visible care. "Consistent with voluntary intimacy." The room was very quiet. "They made sure," Nyla said slowly, working through it because she needed to say it plainly, needed to hear it in plain language, that it would look real. Yes. They needed it to look real so that even if the drug came out later, there would be enough physical evidence to sustain the story. Yes. She looked at Min-jae. He was looking at her. He had known, she realized, for some amount of time before this meeting, long enough for whatever she was watching on his face now to have already moved through the acute stage and into something older and more settled. He looked like a man who had been carrying something very heavy for at least several hours and had brought her in to give her her portion of it. "Is there physical evidence," she said very carefully, "of what you just described? In my case." Director Shin hesitated. "The tox screen your own doctor ran in the initial days was not comprehensive enough to detect the specific compound. However, we have the building records, the contractor's access logs, the financial trail, sufficient to establish the methodology. But not sufficient to prove conclusively what happened to me. Sufficient," Min-jae said quietly, "to make the truth very clear to anyone who looks at it honestly." She heard the apology in it. Not a stated one. He was not a man who would state one easily, and she was not in a place to receive one. But it was there, folded into the sentence like something he couldn't help letting through. She stood up. She wasn't sure why. Her legs just decided they needed to move. She walked to the window and stood where Min-jae had been standing and looked out at the garden. The rain had stopped. The paths were dark with wet, and the stone wall at the back was the same gray as the sky. 14 months. She had thought it was chance. She had thought she was just unlucky, just the random person who had been in the wrong place. She had been building a picture of herself as someone caught in a crossfire, an accidental casualty, someone grabbed because she was convenient. She was not convenient. She was chosen.
She had been watched and selected and moved like a piece before she even knew there was a board. Camille had found the staffing agency. Camille had found the building. Camille had maintained the friendship for 11 months. The calls, the visits, the grocery runs, the hand-holding. While she was on a payroll and Nyla was walking into the trap one ordinary Tuesday at a time. Her stomach moved in a way that had nothing to do with the information and everything to do with something else. A physical sensation she had been half aware of for the past few days that she had attributed to stress and insufficient food and the generally catastrophic nature of her life. She put one hand against the window frame to steady herself. "Miss Brooks?" Min-jae's voice. Closer than she expected. He had moved, was now several feet behind her instead of across the room. "I'm fine," she said. "You're not." "I know I'm not. I said I'm fine." She turned around. He was close enough that she had to look up slightly to see his face. Whatever he saw in hers made him go very still. "I need to," she started, and then the nausea that had been manageable became sudden and urgent, and she said, "Excuse me," in a voice that left no room for discussion, and moved past him and found the hallway bathroom and shut the door behind her. She was sick, efficiently, wretchedly, her body making its position on the events of the past 3 weeks absolutely clear. She sat on the tile floor afterward with her back against the wall and her knees pulled up and breathed through her nose until the worst of it passed. She had been sick twice in the past week. She had told herself it was stress. She had half believed it. But sitting on the bathroom floor of Min-jae's East Wing, she did the arithmetic, the kind of arithmetic she had been unconsciously avoiding for several days because there was too much else to be managing, too many other disasters requiring attention. And the arithmetic was not ambiguous. Her period was 5 weeks late. She pressed both hands against her face and held them there. Behind her palms it was dark and quiet, and for a moment she could not think about any of it. Not Camille, not Jinwoo, not 14 months of calculated betrayal, not the evidence that was sufficient to establish methodology, but not prove what they had done to her. She could only be in the bathroom with her hands over her face and the understanding of what was most likely true moving through her like cold water. She was pregnant. Min-jae's child. A child conceived in circumstances that had been engineered by his enemy, using her body as the instrument, and she was now inside his walls with his ring on her finger and absolutely nowhere to go that was safe. No person alive who she trusted completely, no plan that had accounted for this. She lowered her hands. She looked at the bathroom door. On the other side of it was Min-jae and Director Shin, and a house full of people who worked for a man who had proven, repeatedly, that he would use whatever was available to him to protect what was his. A child would be available to him. A child would be, in every legal and biological sense, also his. And a man who had managed to strong-arm an innocent woman into a marriage she didn't want within a week of meeting her would not struggle to find a way to use a baby to ensure she never had leverage again. She could not tell him. She understood that as clearly as she had ever understood anything. She could not tell him yet, not until she knew more, not until she had something that could hold its own against whatever he would do with the information. She needed time, she needed evidence. She needed the thing behind the refrigerator in the apartment she no longer had access to, which she had already copied to her phone, but which felt very small against the scale of what she was actually inside. She stood up. She ran cold water and washed her face and looked at herself in the mirror. The wedding makeup was long gone. The ivory dress had been replaced with her own clothes days ago. She looked like herself, tired, stripped down, every resource she had redirected from ordinary living toward the work of surviving an extraordinary situation. She dried her hands. She straightened up. She opened the bathroom door. Min-jae was in the hallway. Not pacing. He didn't pace. He was constitutionally incapable of pacing, but standing, which in him conveyed the same quality of contained agitation. "Director Shin has left," he said. He was looking at her with an expression she still didn't have a full vocabulary for, measuring, but not cold, trying to read her without pushing. "Good," she said. "Are you—" "I need to know," she said, cutting across whatever he was going to ask. "Exactly what your investigation has found about how Jinwoo's organization operates. Not the summary, the detail. I need to understand the structure." He looked at her for a moment. "Why?" "Because," she said, and her voice was steady, and her hands were steady, and nothing inside her was steady at all. "Whatever they plan next hasn't happened yet. You said it yourself, Jinwoo doesn't work quickly.
He sets things in motion and lets them run. Whatever comes after me is already running, and the only way to stop it is to understand how it works from the inside. Min-jae studied her. The assessment in his gaze was different from the interrogation room. Not looking for guilt, looking for something else. Capability, maybe. Or the specific quality that was required for what she was proposing. "You're asking me to include you in the investigation," he said. "I'm telling you," she said, "that I am already in the investigation whether you include me or not. The only question is whether I'm doing it with your resources or without them." The hallway was quiet. Somewhere in the house, a door opened and closed. Rain started again against the far windows, soft and persistent. Min-jae looked at her for a long moment. Then he stepped back and gestured toward the East Wing study she had come from. "Come inside," he said. She followed him back through the door, and as she sat down across from him, and he opened a laptop and turned it toward her and began to explain the layers of what his team had found. She kept her breathing even and her face still, and her hands flat on the table. And underneath all of it, sealed behind everything she could not say and could not show, the knowledge of what was growing inside her body sat like a stone in still water, sending out rings she had no way yet of measuring. The laptop was open between them for 3 hours. Min-jae walked her through it the way someone walks through a minefield, carefully, with attention to where each step landed. Director Shin's team had built a map of Jin Woo's organization over the course of 18 months, and what it showed was not a rival company or even a conventional criminal operation, but something more like a parasite, an entity that existed entirely in relation to what it was consuming, that had no independent structure except the one defined by the shape of what it was trying to destroy. Kang Industries was the host. Everything Jin Woo had built was built around the specific topology of Min-jae's empire. Nyla looked at the financial charts, the shell company diagrams, the communication intercepts that Director Shin's team had flagged without being able to fully decode. She asked questions. Specific ones. Not about the big picture, which she could already see, but about the mechanics. How the shell accounts were structured. How the intermediaries were paid. How someone like Camille, who had no background in finance or organized crime, would have been brought in and managed without knowing more than she needed to know. Min-jae answered. I was a good explainer, precise, without condescension, willing to backtrack when she indicated she needed something clarified. She noted this somewhere in the back of her mind without assigning it any particular weight. By the time the laptop closed, it was past midnight. The house had gone quiet around them. The rain had stopped sometime in the second hour, and the garden beyond the window was dark and still and wet. The transfers to Camille, Nyla said. Where did they originate? Third-level shell, registered in the Cayman Islands, held by a nominee director with no actual connection to Jin Woo. But the money came from him. Eventually, yes. It would take a prosecutor several months to trace it, longer if Jin Woo's lawyers had time to prepare. What about the building contractor, the ventilation system? He's gone. Left the country 11 days ago. We're tracking his location, but he's beyond immediate reach. Nyla looked at the closed laptop. So what you have, she said slowly, is enough to understand what happened, but not quite enough to prove it publicly in a way that ends this. Correct. Because Jin Woo anticipated that you'd investigate and built the trail to be expensive and slow. Yes. So what you need, she said, is something he didn't anticipate. Min-jae looked at her across the table. What do you mean? He planned around you, Nyla said. He built everything to absorb and slow down whatever you would do. Legal pressure, financial countermoves, intelligence operations. He's been watching you for 3 years. He knows how you move. She paused. He has no file on me. He grabbed me because I was a clean surface with no connections. That's also the thing he got wrong. He assumed that because I had no connections, I had no capacity. The silence in the room was the particular kind that happened when something had shifted. What are you proposing? Min-jae said. I'm proposing, she said, that Camille doesn't know I heard her in the stairwell. He went very still. She thinks I'm here because you forced me, which is true, but she doesn't know what I know about her. She's still playing her role, the concerned best friend. She's called me 4 times since the wedding. I haven't answered, but she's still calling. Nyla looked at her hands on the table. She's going to keep trying to reach me because Jin Woo needs someone inside this house. That's the next phase she mentioned, getting access to me while I'm inside your walls so she can report on what's happening. You want to use her, Min-jae said. I want to use the fact that she doesn't know what I know, which is the only advantage I currently have. She looked up at him. She'll give me Jinwoo. If I play it right, she'll give me enough to bury him. Min-jae studied her for a long moment. His face was doing something complicated. Several things at once, moving through them with the disciplined speed of someone who made high-stakes calculations professionally. This is dangerous, he said. Yes. If she realizes you know, if she reports back to Jinwoo that you're working against him, then I become a liability instead of an asset, and things get worse. Nyla nodded. I understand the risk. You'd be the one exposed, not me, not my team, you. I know. He looked at her for another long moment. Then, I want Director Shin involved. You work with his team. You don't move without... I move when I need to move, she said. Director Shin can be informed. He doesn't get to approve or delay. If Camille calls tomorrow and I have a 30-second window to say the right thing, I cannot wait for clearance. His jaw tightened. She could see him hating it, the loss of control over a variable, the specific friction of needing to trust someone he had spent 3 weeks treating as an adversary. Agreed, he said. The word came out like something conceded rather than given. She nodded. She stood up. Her legs were steady, which was what she needed them to be. One more thing, he said. She stopped. Are you all right? Not strategically. Actually. She looked at him. He was watching her with an expression she still didn't have a name for, the thing that appeared sometimes in the spaces between his controlled surfaces, that was not warmth exactly, but was something adjacent to it. I'm managing, she said. She went back to her room. She sat on the edge of the bed in the dark and pressed her palm flat against her own abdomen and stayed there for a long time without moving. She could not afford to fall apart. She had filed that option away somewhere inaccessible, and she needed it to stay there. Camille called the next morning at 8:47. Nyla was in the garden, damp grass under her shoes, the cold air moving through her jacket in a way that was uncomfortable and clarifying simultaneously. She looked at the screen for 2 full rings. Then she answered. Why? Camille's voice was exactly what it always was. Warm, slightly breathless, arriving like something urgent. I've been so worried. Please talk to me. I know everything is terrible right now, and I just need to know you're okay. I'm okay, Nyla said. She kept her voice flat enough to be believable. This was not a person who was fine, so performing fine would have been a mistake. She performed manageable, exhausted, isolated. I'm inside his house. I don't really have anywhere else to be. God. A breath. I'm so sorry, Nee. I keep thinking about how this all happened, and Can I see you? Can I come there? I don't know if they'd let you in. Could you ask? I just need to see your face, know you're actually okay. Nyla looked at the stone wall at the back of the garden. I'll ask. She spoke to Min-jae that evening. He listened to the plan, Camille coming to the estate under the assumption that she was getting access for Jinwoo's purposes, while Director Shin's team monitored every communication device she carried. She'll come wired, Director Shin said at the meeting Min-jae called that afternoon. She'll have a recording device or a live transmit. She may also attempt to pass you something, a tracking device, a secondary phone, something to establish a private communication channel. I know, Nyla said. Let her. Director Shin looked at her. Explain. If she establishes a channel with me, I have a direct line to whoever she's reporting to. That's more useful than anything on her devices. A silence. Then Director Shin looked at Min-jae and said something in Korean too fast for Nyla to catch. Min-jae responded, equally fast. Then he looked at her. 2 weeks from now, he said. We need that time to set up the monitoring infrastructure without alerting Jinwoo's people that we're watching. 2 weeks. She nodded. 2 weeks was a long time to sit inside a house with a secret she was not going to tell anyone. She managed it day by day. The morning garden walks. The library in the afternoons. The evenings that had settled into something like a pattern. Min-jae appearing at her door with food, the two of them sitting at the desk or the small table near the window, talking. Not always about Jinwoo, not always strategically. She told him once about Atlanta, about the Waffle House, and the bathroom, and the visa, and screaming across 12 time zones. She didn't tell him who she'd been screaming with. He listened without commenting until she finished, and then said, "You came here because you wanted something different." "Yes." "Did you find it?" She looked at him. "I found something different. That's not the same as what I wanted." He was quiet for a moment. Then, with the particular awkwardness of someone unused to making this kind of admission, "I haven't been outside the city in 6 years. Not genuinely. Business trips don't count." "Where would you go?" she asked. "If you could." He thought about it with more seriousness than the question probably warranted. "Somewhere cold," he said finally, "without cameras." She looked out the window at the dark garden. "That sounds like exactly what you'd say." Something that was almost a smile moved across his face and was gone. She thought about those evenings later, when everything had happened, when she needed to understand how she had arrived at the things she would eventually feel. She thought about how dangerous it was. Not the strategy, not the plan with Camille, but this. The way a person could become familiar. The way familiarity, in the right conditions of isolation and shared pressure, could become something that looked like trust and felt like more than that if you weren't careful. She was careful. She kept the wall up. But she noted, with the honesty she owed herself, that the wall required active maintenance in a way it hadn't needed at the start. Camille arrived on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks after the wedding. She drove herself, the same small second-hand car, and was stopped at the gate for 7 minutes while Director Shin's team swept the vehicle. They found 2 devices, a small transmitter sewn into the lining of her jacket, and a secondary phone in a hidden compartment in the car's center console. Nyla was told about both by earpiece before Camille walked through the door. She met her in the front sitting room. Camille came in and crossed the room in 3 steps and took Nyla's hands in both of hers and looked at her face with an expression of such specific, practiced concern that Nyla felt a fresh wave of something that was not quite grief and not quite nausea, and was probably both. "You look thin," Camille said. "I haven't been sleeping well." "Of course you haven't." Camille squeezed her hands. "No, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry all of this happened to you. Tell me you're not actually... I mean, it's not real, right? This whole marriage thing. It's just for show." "It's complicated," Nyla said. "Because he's still treating you like a suspect?" "He's treating me like..." "It's complicated," she said again. "Come sit down." They sat on the sofa. Camille kept her hand. Nyla let her. They talked for 40 minutes, Nyla giving carefully constructed fragments of truth, enough to be credible, shaped to serve the plan. That she was frightened, that Min-jae was colder than he appeared publicly, that she felt trapped and monitored and unsure who to trust. All of it true. None of it the whole truth. Camille listened with the focused, generous attention of someone collecting information. She asked questions that were slightly too precise, about the layout of the house, about which staff members seemed most sympathetic, about whether Nyla had access to Min-jae's study. She framed each question in concern, wrapped in friendship, delivered with the warmth that had been the defining quality of everything Nyla had known about her since they were 12 years old. Near the end of the visit, Camille pressed a small object into Nyla's palm while leaning in to hug her goodbye. A phone. Small, cheap, the kind that didn't require an account to activate. "In case you need to reach me and they're watching your regular phone," Camille murmured against her shoulder. "I just need to know you're safe." "Thank you," Nyla said. She hugged back. She kept her arm steady and her face against Camille's shoulder and her eyes open and dry. Director Shin's team had the phone's specifications within 20 minutes of Camille's car leaving the gate. It was a live transmit device. Anything said near it was broadcast to a receiver within a half-mile radius, which would relay to a more distant hub. They could not break the encryption quickly enough to read Jinwoo's end, but they could track the relay points. It took 11 more days. 11 days of Nyla carrying the phone in her jacket pocket, of staged conversations near it, of feeding information that was close enough to real to be credible and shaped enough to be controlled. She slept badly and ate badly and kept the wall up and walked the garden every morning and did not tell anyone what she had known for nearly a month about the thing she was carrying that was not a secret she could keep forever. The relay trace resolved on a Wednesday at 4 a.m. Director Shin called the encrypted line Min-jae had given her and said, "We have him. Address confirmed. We move tonight." She was at the estate when it happened. She had to be. There was no role for her in what came next, which was Min-jae, and Director Shin, and 37 members of an organization that had been building toward this for 3 years. She understood this and accepted it and sat in the library at 4 a.m. with the lights on and her hands around a cup of tea that had gone cold, and waited. The raid on Seo Jinwoo's primary compound took 4 hours. She knew this because Min-jae called her at 8:19 a.m. His voice was different, not warm, but stripped of the compression that had been in it for as long as she'd known him. Something released in it. "It's done," he said. She closed her eyes, pressed her fingers against her mouth, breathed. "Camille?" she managed. "Detained. She's been taken into police custody. She'll be processed through the formal system. She's unharmed." Nyla nodded, even though he couldn't see her. She didn't trust her voice for a moment. "Come back," she said. "Please just come back." A silence on the line, then, "I'm on my way." She put the phone down and sat in the library alone for the 20 minutes it took his car to reach the estate, and felt, for the first time since she had woken up to the sound of a helicopter in a bed she didn't recognize, that the immediate shape of the danger was over. But over was not the same as resolved, and resolved was not the same as safe. And safe was not the same as the conversation she had been postponing for 32 days that was now, with the external crisis dismantled, and the walls between them significantly thinner than they had been, impossible to postpone any longer. Min-jae came through the library door, still in the clothes he'd worn since the previous afternoon, which was unusual enough. He was constitutively put together, that she noted it immediately. His jacket was off. His shirt was wrinkled at the collar, and there was a cut above his left eyebrow, with a dried line of blood running from it that someone had clearly attempted to clean up hastily and not quite finished. She stood up. "You're hurt," she said. "It's nothing." "It's..." She stopped herself, redirected. "Sit down." He sat on the sofa. She found the first aid kit she'd seen in the hall cabinet twice during her weeks of learning the house, brought it back and sat across from him. She opened it. He watched her with an expression she didn't look at directly. She cleaned the cut. He was still for it, which she appreciated. The cut was shallow. It needed a small adhesive closure rather than stitching, and she pressed the closure into place with steady hands and then sat back. "Thank you," he said. "You should have someone look at it properly." "I will." She set the first aid kit on the cushion beside her. She looked at her own hands. She had thought, in the 32 days she had been postponing this, about how to say it. She had composed versions and discarded them. She had thought about timing and setting and the specific vulnerability of this particular arrangement. Two people who were legally married and strategically entangled and had spent 32 days becoming something neither of them had intended to become, having a conversation that would irrevocably change the balance of every power they had between them. She had not found a good version. There was no good version. There was only the truth, which needed to be said, and the consequences of it, which were unpredictable and could not be controlled. "There's something I need to tell you," she said. Min-jae looked at her. He had a particular quality of attention, not the strategic kind, the kind he wore in meetings and negotiations, but the other kind that she had seen most clearly in the late evenings in this library, something that was actually listening. "I'm pregnant," she said. "I've known for about a month." The silence that followed was the longest she had experienced in a life that had recently provided several strong contenders. Min-jae's face did not collapse. It did not do the thing she had feared, the swift calculation, the managerial reassessment, the pivot to leverage. It went completely still. Not the controlled stillness that was his default register. Something else. The stillness of a person who has received information that has not yet found anywhere to land. She watched him. "A month," he said, finally. The words were very quiet. "Yes." "You knew during..." Stopped. Something crossed his face. "You were running an intelligence operation for 3 weeks knowing you were..." "Yes." "Why didn't you..." "Because I didn't know what you would do with it." She said it straight. "I still don't know. But I've run out of time to wait until I do." He stood up. He walked to the window. The same window he had stood at the night she'd first come to this room, the night Director Shin had given her the worst information of her life. He stood with his back to her, and she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands were at his sides, but not quite still. "It's mine," he said. "Yes." The timing, the night in the suite, she said. There's no other possibility. I was quiet for a long time. She stayed on the sofa and let the silence run because there was nothing she could add to it that would help anything. Either he was going to be the person she feared, or he wasn't. She had given him the information, and she could not control what he did with it. He turned around. His face was... She didn't have a word for it. Fractured, maybe, was the closest thing. Not broken, because he was still standing and his eyes were still sharp, but something in the structure of his expression had shifted in a way that was irreversible. He looked older. He looked, very briefly, like someone who was understanding something for the first time. "What do you want?" he said. "Not what do you think I want. What do you want?" She looked at him. The question surprised her, not because it was kind, but because it was real, because it actually asked her rather than telling her. "I want," she said carefully, "to do this on my own terms. I want to make my own decisions about what happens next. I want—" She stopped, gathered herself. "I want to not be a piece on your board. Not the baby either." He nodded slowly. "All right." "That's not a conversation. All right is not, I mean it." He crossed back toward her and stood several feet away and looked down at her with an expression that had shed every layer of calculation. "I spent 3 years running this organization on the principle that everything was a resource. People, relationships, situations. I processed everything that way." A pause. "I processed you that way? The morning in the suite, the interrogation, the marriage." He stopped. His jaw worked once. "I was wrong. About almost everything." She looked at him. The words sat in the room. "That doesn't fix it," she said. "No," he agreed. "It doesn't change what you did. The wall, the accusation, the room, any of it. No. So why are you telling me?" "Because," he said, and the word came out with a difficulty she had not heard from him before, "you told me the truth when you didn't have to, when it was a risk, when you'd spent a month building every reason not to." He looked at her. "I'm trying to do the same." She held his gaze. Her chest was doing something complicated. She was not going to name it. She was not going to give it a name and put it somewhere real where it could become something she had to manage alongside everything else. "What happens now?" she said. "Practically. The legal cases against Jinwoo will proceed. He'll be in custody for years before anything resolves. Camille will be..." He paused. "She'll be in the system. The charges are serious." "I know. The public narrative needs to shift. There'll be press. My team will work on..." "I know all of that." She shook her head. "I meant between us. Practically." He sat down. Not across from her, but on the same sofa, at the other end, enough distance between them that it was respectful. "What do you want it to look like?" She pressed her lips together, looked at her hands. "I want to go somewhere and think. Somewhere that isn't this house and isn't Seoul and isn't in the middle of your operation. I need..." The words stuck slightly. "I need to figure out what I actually feel outside of a crisis. I've been inside a crisis for 5 weeks and I can't..." She stopped. "I need air." He was quiet. She could feel him working through something. "There's a property," he said, "in the country. 2 hours from here. It's not a compound. It's just a house. Small. There are staff there who can..." "One person," she said. "Someone who can help with the basics. That's all." Agreed. "I want to know," she said, "that you'll leave me alone there. That you won't use it as an opportunity to..." "I'll leave you alone," he said. She looked at him. "I believe you," she said, and was surprised to find she meant it. "I don't fully trust you. I don't know if that's possible yet, but I believe that right now in this specific thing, you mean what you're saying." He held her gaze. "That's enough," he said, "for right now." She stood up. Her body was tired in the comprehensive way it had been for weeks, a tiredness that went beyond sleep and into something more fundamental. "I'll need a few days to prepare." "Take what you need." She moved toward the door. She stopped at the threshold, one hand against the frame. She turned back. He was still sitting where she'd left him, elbows on knees, hands loosely linked, watching her with the expression she didn't have a name for. "The cut," she said. "Have someone look at it properly. Tonight, not tomorrow." Something moved across his face. "I will." She went back to her room. She sat on the edge of the bed and pressed both hands over her face and stayed there for a long time in the dark. Outside, Seoul was waking up. Somewhere in a police processing facility, Camille was being fingerprinted and photographed by people who did not know her name from 7th grade, or the screaming across 12 time zones, or the way she laughed too hard and talked too fast. Somewhere across the city, Seo Jin-woo was in a holding room being looked at by people who had spent 3 years building the case against him and were now watching it close. And in a library 2 rooms away, the most dangerous man in South Korea was sitting in a wrinkled shirt with a cut above his eye that she had cleaned with steady hands, and the thing between them, unnamed, unmapped, structurally unsound, and almost certainly unwise, was still there. She was 3 months pregnant. She was legally married to a man she had known for 5 weeks, under conditions that would test the limits of any rational attachment. She had no job, no apartment, an agency contract that had been terminated, and a best friend who was going to spend the foreseeable future answering to prosecutors. She had also, in the past 5 weeks, run an intelligence operation that had helped dismantle a criminal organization's 3-year campaign against the largest conglomerate in the city, while managing a pregnancy alone and keeping her face still in every conversation. She took that in. Not with pride exactly, with something quieter, a plain acknowledgement of what she had done and what it had cost and what was still left to get through. Tomorrow she would start packing. In 2 days she would leave for a small house in the country, and she would walk somewhere that was not a formal garden with stone walls, and she would breathe air that didn't feel like it belonged to anyone. But first she needed this room, this dark, this particular moment of stillness before the next thing began. She lay back on the bed. She put one hand over her abdomen. She breathed. Somewhere outside the window, a car alarm went off and then stopped. A dog barked twice. The ordinary noise of a city that had no idea what had happened in the past 24 hours, moving through its ordinary Wednesday morning without interrupting itself. She closed her eyes. In 2 hours, Director Shin would call with an update on Camille's processing that would contain a detail she had not anticipated, something Camille had said in her first interview that would reframe one piece of what Nyla thought she already fully understood, and would send a cold line of dread down her spine despite the fact that Jin-woo was in custody and the operation was over and the worst should have been behind her. But she didn't know that yet. Right now she only knew the dark behind her closed eyes, and the specific quality of quiet that came after the loudest thing had finally stopped, and the feeling, fragile, unproven, not fully trusted but there, that she had survived something that was supposed to break her and had not quite managed it yet. Director Shin's call came at 6:14 in the morning. Nyla had not slept. She had lain on the bed in the dark with her hand over her abdomen and her eyes open and her mind running through things she could not stop it from running through. And when the phone buzzed on the nightstand, she picked it up before the second vibration. "There's something you need to hear," Director Shin said. No preamble, no softening. She had come to appreciate that about him. "Tell me." Hart gave her first interview at 2 this morning. Standard processing protocol. "We have an arrangement with the department that allows us to receive transcripts of the initial statement within the same session." A pause. The kind that preceded something the speaker had already decided how to deliver, but was taking one final moment with. She told them about a secondary contingency, something Jin-woo built into the operation in the event that the primary plan succeeded, but the alliance between you and Kang became stabilized, became real. Nyla sat up. "What kind of contingency?" "There is a person," Director Shin said, "currently embedded in the estate's household staff, placed 11 months ago, before you arrived." Jin-woo anticipated the possibility that if the scandal failed to destroy the company, Kang might use the situation to consolidate, marry whoever was involved, absorb the narrative, turn it into a loyalty story. He prepared for that. The cold moved through her, starting at the back of her neck. "Who?" she said. "A woman named Cho Yuna. She has been working as a kitchen staff member for the past 11 months. She arrived with impeccable references from an agency that, we now know, is a Jin-woo front." Another pause. Her instructions, according to Hart, were to wait, to establish herself as trustworthy and unremarkable. And if the situation stabilized, if Kang and whoever he brought in appeared to be forming a genuine bond, she was to ensure that bond was interrupted, permanently, if necessary. Permanently. The words sat in the room. "Does Min-jae know?" Nyla said. "I'm calling you first. You need to leave your room and go to him. Now. Don't use the internal phone system. Walk directly to the East Wing." She was already on her feet, shoes. The notepad out of habit. Then she left it, left everything except the phone in her hand and moved to the door. The estate at 6 a.m. was not empty. Staff arrived early. Kitchen, grounds, security rotation change. She had learned this in the first week. She moved through the second-floor hallway and down the main stairs with the particular quality of movement that was not running but was everything adjacent to it. The kind of walking that the body does when the mind has decided that speed is necessary, but panic is not an option. She was 3 steps from the east wing door when she heard it, a sound from below. The kitchen level, directly beneath her, transmitted through the old bones of the building in a way that the modern renovation hadn't fully dampened. Something breaking, not a dropped dish. The specific sound of something being overturned deliberately, followed by a voice she recognized. Min-jae's voice. And another voice, a woman's, in Korean she could catch fragments of. She changed direction. The kitchen was on the ground floor through the connecting hall. She went through 2 doors and down the service stairs and pushed the kitchen door open and took in the scene in the time it took to draw one breath. Min-jae was standing near the center island. He was in the clothes he'd worn yesterday, which confirmed he also had not slept. Across from him, backed against the far counter with her hands visible and her chin up, was a woman Nyla recognized as one of the kitchen staff, mid-30s, slight, dark hair pulled back, who she had seen every morning for 3 weeks without once registering as anything other than part of the background of this house. Between them, on the floor, was a shattered coffee cup, and near Min-jae's hand on the island surface was a small glass vial, empty. Director Shin had called Min-jae at the same moment, or Min-jae had already been in the kitchen. She couldn't tell which. She looked at the vial, looked at Min-jae's face. He had already known for several minutes, she realized. The expression on his face was not the shock of fresh information, but the controlled stillness of someone who had received a detonation and was managing the shockwave. His eyes moved to her when she came through the door and something in them shifted. Relief, she thought, or what relief looked like in a person who didn't allow himself to show it directly. Go back upstairs, he said. No, she said. Nyla, no. She stepped further into the kitchen. The woman, Cho Yuna, looked at her. Her face was blank in a way that was not calm but was the performance of calm, the face of someone who had prepared for this moment and was now executing the prepared response. What was in the vial? Nobody answered. She looked at Min-jae. What was in it? We don't know yet, he said. His voice was very controlled. The cup broke when she dropped it. We haven't... It was meant for you, Yuna said. In English. Clear and unhurried, with the particular composure of someone who had decided that the operation was over and performance was no longer necessary. She was looking at Nyla. Not him. He doesn't drink the morning coffee from this kitchen. You do. The kitchen was very quiet. Nyla heard her own heartbeat. You've been watching my routine, she said. 11 months in this house, Yuna said. I know every routine. How long have you been watching me specifically? Since the wedding announcement. A small pause. You were not part of the original plan. You were supposed to be discarded. After the night in the suite, after the story ran, you were meant to disappear into the scandal and never be significant again. Something moved across her face. Not quite contempt, not quite admiration, something between them. You didn't disappear. Min-jae's security arrived 40 seconds later. Yuna went with them without resistance. The vial was collected, the broken cup documented. She watched all of it from the kitchen doorway with her arms crossed over her chest, her hands gripping her own elbows, and said nothing. After Yuna was gone and the security team had cleared the kitchen, and it was just the 2 of them in the cold morning light coming through the kitchen windows, Min-jae turned to her. He looked, she thought, like someone who had been building something very carefully for a very long time and had just watched a wall of it come down. Not from exhaustion, he was past exhaustion, had been operating past it for days, but from the particular weight of understanding that the threat had been in the house the entire time, had been pouring coffee and chopping vegetables and moving through the background of every careful day they'd spent inside these walls. The vial's contents came back in 4 hours, he said. I'll have Director Shin tell you everything. Tell me yourself, she said. He looked at her for a moment, then, a compound that causes premature labor. In the 3rd trimester it would have been, he stopped. His jaw worked once. Earlier, it's less certain, but the intent was clear. The intent was clear. She sat down on the kitchen stool because her legs had quietly submitted their resignation. She put her elbows on the island surface and pressed her fingers against her forehead and breathed through 8 counts in and 8 counts out. Someone had spent 11 months in this house waiting to take her pregnancy from her, a pregnancy that hadn't existed until 5 weeks ago, which meant the contingency had been designed to be activated against whoever Min-jae ended up with, whoever ended up carrying leverage he might actually care about. She had been a variable. The baby was a variable. Every person around her was a chess piece to people who had been playing this game for 3 years, and she had spent 5 weeks believing that because Jinwoo was in custody, the board had been cleared. "Is it over?" she said. She already knew the answer. Jinwoo's organization has 37 confirmed members. We've detained 19. The others are scattered. Most will go quiet. They have no cause to pursue this independently. He paused. But no, not entirely over. Not for several months. She lifted her head, looked at him. Then I'm not safe here. No. And the country house isn't safe either. No, I'm sorry, No. She looked at the kitchen window. Outside, the formal garden, the stone wall, the road beyond it, and the city beyond that. And beyond the city, a world that had spent 5 weeks deciding she was a criminal and a seductress and a woman who had burned a dynasty for personal gain. "Where then?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. "I have a property in Japan, Kyoto. It's not listed under my name or any of my known entities. It was purchased through a structure that Jinwoo's team never identified. The staff there are 3 people. I've used it twice in 6 years." "Somewhere cold," she said quietly, without cameras. Something crossed his face. He recognized the words. "Yes," he said. She looked at him for a long time. She thought about the kitchen table in her old apartment and the post-it note and the iced coffee and the fluorescent light above the break room bench. She thought about how far she was from that Nyla now, how many versions of herself she had cycled through in 5 weeks, and how she still was not sure which version was the real one or whether that question even applied anymore. "I need 2 days," she said, "to see someone before I go." He knew who she meant. He didn't ask. He nodded. The detention facility where Camille was being held was 40 minutes from the estate. Min-jae arranged it, not sitting in on it, not sending anyone with her except a driver who waited outside. Just the arrangement, the access, the car. Nyla sat in the visitor room for 6 minutes before Camille was brought in. 6 minutes of looking at a table bolted to the floor and 2 chairs and a window with wire mesh in the glass. 6 minutes of trying to figure out what she was going to say and finding, each time, that she didn't know. Camille came through the door and stopped when she saw her. She was wearing facility clothes. Her hair was down. She looked like herself. That was the thing that was hardest, that she looked exactly like herself, like Camille who had been Nyla's person since 7th grade. She sat down. They looked at each other through the wire mesh window. "You don't have to be here," Camille said. "No," Nyla agreed. "Then why?" "Because I needed to see your face," Nyla said. "When I asked you something." Camille was very still. "Did you know," Nyla said, "about the compound, about what was supposed to happen to me in the house, with the pregnancy?" A silence. Long enough that Nyla had her answer before Camille said anything. "I didn't know the specifics," Camille said. Her voice was different, not the practiced warmth, not the performance of concern. Something stripped down, something that might have been closer to who she actually was. "I knew there was a contingency. I didn't know what it involved." "But you knew there was one." "Yes." Nyla looked at her. "We were 12 years old when we met," she said. "Do you remember that? The cafeteria. You sat next to me because I was reading a book you'd already read, and you wanted to talk about it." Camille's throat moved. "I remember." "I need to know when," Nyla said. "Not the details of the operation. When did you stop? When did the friendship stop being real for you?" Camille looked at the table between them. A long time passed. "It didn't," she said finally. The words came out rough, pulled from somewhere deeper than the facility clothes and the prepared composure. "That's what I keep. It didn't stop. I told myself I could do both, that you'd never actually get hurt.
That it would be the scandal, and then it would settle and you'd get paid off and go back to Atlanta and never have to. She stopped. Her voice had cracked on the last words. She pressed her lips together. But you kept going, Nyla said. After the scandal, after I was inside that house, you kept going. I didn't know how to stop. You could have told me. I was scared. I was alone in a foreign country carrying a baby, Nyla said. And you knew someone in that house was waiting to... She stopped, breathed. I was scared too. I've been scared for 5 weeks. The difference is I didn't have a choice about being in the middle of it. You did. Camille was crying now, quietly, without drama, the way people cry when they are not performing for anyone. She wiped her face with the back of her hand and did not look away. I know, she said. I'm not going to forgive you today, Nyla said. I don't know if I'm going to forgive you. I don't know what that looks like from where I'm standing right now. I know. But I needed to tell you that I know it was real. Some of it, maybe most of it. The 7th grade and the Waffle House bathroom and the 12 time zones. I believe that was real, even though the rest of it... She stopped. Even though the rest of it was what it was. Camille was looking at her with an expression that was open and broken and fully present in a way that all the warmth and concern of the past 5 weeks had never quite managed to be. I'm sorry, she said. Just that. No architecture around it, no framing or softening. Nyla stood up. I know, she said. She walked out. She did not look back through the wire mesh window. She got into the car and she sat in the back seat and she let herself have the 10 minutes of the drive where she could feel exactly what she felt without managing it, without holding it still, without keeping the wall up. Then she dried her face and sat up straight and looked out the window at Seoul moving past and began the work of deciding what came next. Kyoto in November was cold and gray and smelled like wet cedar and old stone. The house was small in the way that expensive things sometimes were. Not grand, not imposing, just completely itself, tucked into the edge of a neighborhood that moved at a pace that felt like a different relationship with time. A canal behind it. Maple trees dropping red leaves into the water. The 3 staff members were an older couple who managed the house, and a young woman who came in the mornings to help with the kitchen. They spoke almost no English and Nyla spoke no Japanese, and they worked out a system of gestures and written notes and occasional Korean, which the older woman, it turned out, spoke with a formality that reminded Nyla of a radio broadcast. She slept. For the first 2 days, she slept more than she had in 2 months, in a bed that was low to the ground and had the particular weight of good blankets, in a room where the only sound was the canal and the occasional car on the road and the sound of her own breathing. On the 3rd day, she walked, not in a formal garden with a stone wall, but through the streets of an old neighborhood that did not know her name, past temples with moss on their roof lines and small shops selling things she couldn't identify, and canal paths where other people walked their dogs and their children without looking at her. She was nobody here. She was a pregnant woman in a coat walking along a canal. It was the most ordinary she had felt since the morning she had woken up to the sound of a helicopter. She called Min-jae on the 4th day, not because she needed to, because she wanted to. He picked up on the 2nd ring. How is it? He said. Cold, she said. Quiet. Good. There's a ramen place 2 blocks from the house, she said. The older woman, Mrs. Tanaka. She took me there this morning. I had 3 bowls. A pause. She could hear something in the quality of it that was not nothing. 3. I'm eating for at least 2 and I've been terrible at it for 2 months. The baby has opinions about ramen, apparently. The baby has good taste, he said, and it came out slightly wrong, too stiff, as if he'd wanted to say it, and then second-guessed it halfway through and couldn't take it back. She smiled at the canal. She didn't tell him she was smiling. Director Shin's update came through, she said. 2 more detentions. Yes. He told me you'd been reading the reports. I asked him to send them. I know. He asked me if that was all right. I told him it wasn't his call. She was quiet for a moment. Thank you. You're inside this, he said. You've been inside it from the beginning. The information is yours as much as anyone's. She looked at the maple trees dropping the last of their leaves into the water. The trial, she said. Jinwoo's trial. When it comes, I'll need to be part of it. My statement. My testimony if it's needed. Yes,
he said. We can discuss how that's structured. I'm not an asset to be structured, she said. Not sharp, just plain. The distinction she needed him to hear. I know, he said. I know that. I said it wrong. You say a lot of things wrong, she said. I know that too. A pause on the line. The canal moved. A leaf came off the closest maple and turned in the air and hit the water. The baby, she said. I had the scan yesterday. Mrs. Tanaka came with me. She stopped. The information was in her throat and she needed to say it, but it was also the kind of thing that once said changed the shape of everything it landed in. It's twins. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. 2, he said finally. 2, she confirmed. She heard his breath. Just that. A single, audible exhale, not controlled, not managed. A breath that had escaped whatever system he used to contain his own responses. A boy and a girl, she said. They think. It's early, but the technician was fairly confident. Another silence. Longer. She waited in it. Are you all right? He said. The question had the same quality as the one in the East Wing study. Not strategic, actually asking. I'm sitting by a canal in Kyoto, she said. I had 3 bowls of ramen this morning. I slept 8 hours last night for the first time in 2 months. She paused. I'm better than I have been. I'm not all right yet, but I'm better. That's enough, he said. For right now. She recognized the words. He did too, she thought. There was something careful in the way he'd used them. Come in 2 weeks, she said. Not before. In 2 weeks, when I've had time to... I need 2 weeks. I'll come in 2 weeks, he said. Don't bring security teams, don't make it a compound. Just come. All right. Bring food, she said. Something good. Mrs. Tanaka is excellent, but I've been thinking about the soup the kitchen made that first week at the estate. The one with... I know the one, he said. There was something in his voice that she could not quite identify. Something that lived in the register just below what he was saying. I'll bring it. She nodded, even though he couldn't see her. 2 weeks, she said, and ended the call. She sat by the canal for another hour. The cold came up off the water and moved through her coat, and she let it because the cold was clean and specific and real. Because after 5 weeks of navigating a world that had been constructed entirely of other people's deceptions, the simplest physical sensations had become something she needed. Evidence that there was still a layer of existence beneath all the strategy and survival that was just her body in the world, just temperature and wind and the smell of wet cedar. 2 weeks passed the way that time passes when you are not managing a crisis. Slowly, with texture, with the small specific details that crises compress out of existence. She learned the ramen place by name and was recognized by the 3rd visit. She found a bookstore 2 canals over where the owner spoke Korean, and they had long conversations about novels she had not had time to read in 2 months. She walked every morning, longer routes each day, as her body settled into the new center of gravity it was negotiating. She thought about Camille, not constantly. The acute phase of that grief had moved into something lower and more chronic, the kind that lives in the background rather than the foreground, that surfaces in specific moments and then recedes. She thought about forgiveness in the way she'd said to Camille, that she didn't know yet what it looked like from where she was standing. That was still true. She thought it might be true for a long time. She thought about Min-jae more than she expected to, which she examined with the honesty she had decided to maintain with herself about everything that had happened. She thought about the East Wing study and the food he'd brought to her room every evening, and the first aid kit and the conversation about somewhere cold without cameras. She thought about the way he said things wrong and then corrected himself and the quality of attention he brought to her when he was actually listening rather than calculating. She thought about trust, not as a destination but as a process, something you couldn't decide to have, something that built in the spaces between decisions, in the small repeated acts of one person showing another what they were made of. She did not have full trust, she did not know if she would, but she understood, in those 2 weeks by the canal, that the architecture of what had been built between them over 5 weeks of mutual crisis was not nothing. It was not what she would have chosen. It was not clean or uncomplicated or free of the damage of how it had started. But it was not nothing. He arrived on a Tuesday, the same day of the week it had all started. She noticed this and decided it meant nothing, because the alternative was to start finding meaning in coincidences, and she had enough complexity to manage without that. He came alone. A car dropped him at the end of the street, and he walked to the house with a bag over one shoulder and a covered container that she could smell from the doorway. The soup, the specific soup, and something else underneath it that turned out to be the particular bread from the estate's kitchen that she had not known she missed until she smelled it. She let him in. He stood in the small entrance hall and looked at the house and then at her, and she watched him do the inventory people do when they haven't seen someone in 2 weeks and are checking whether the person is the same as they left them. "You look different," he said. "Better or worse?" "More like yourself," he said. "I don't know which of those it falls under." She took the food and he followed her to the kitchen, and they ate at the small table near the canal window, which had become her table in 2 weeks, the way that any surface becomes yours when you eat at it every morning alone. He was careful with the space, not stiff, but aware of it, aware that it was hers, and he was in it as a guest. They talked through 2 hours of food and tea. He told her about the case. 6 more of Jinwoo's people had been formally charged, and the financial investigation had expanded to 3 other countries, and the preliminary hearing had been set for the following spring. He told her that the public narrative had shifted significantly. The evidence of the operation, of what had been done to her, and how deliberately, had been released in controlled fragments that had the desired effect. The editorials that had once called her a seductress were now calling her a victim of a sophisticated criminal conspiracy. She found she had complicated feelings about this, which she told him. "You'd rather they said nothing," he said. "I'd rather the truth came out because the truth matters," she said, "not because it's useful to your PR strategy." "Both things can be true simultaneously." "I know, that's what makes it complicated." She looked at her tea. "People spent 5 weeks deciding who I was based on a photograph taken from a drone. Now they'll spend the next 5 weeks deciding I'm someone else based on a press release. I was never consulted about any of it." "You're right," he said, simply, without defense. "I know I'm right," she said. "I just wanted you to know I know." He looked at her. "What do you want the narrative to be?" She considered the question, really considered it, not as a rhetorical stance, but as an actual answer she owed herself. "I want it to be true," she said. "Not managed, true. A woman who was used by people she trusted, who survived it, who—" She stopped. "Who made something out of what was left." "Then that's what it'll be," he said. "Your words, your framing. I'll keep my team out of it unless you want them in." She looked at him. He meant it. She could see that he meant it. "All right," she said. After the food was cleared and the tea was cold, the conversation moved into quieter territory. Not strategy, not the case, not the public narrative. Just the canal and the sound of it, and 2 people in a small kitchen in Kyoto having a conversation that was actually about them for the first time. "I didn't know," he said at one point, quietly, like something he had been building toward for 2 weeks. "What they did to you, in the suite that night." "I didn't know the full methodology until Director Shin's team found it, and by then I had already—" He stopped. His hands were flat on the table. "I had already done everything I did. The interrogation, the room, the threat in your doorway." He looked at her directly. "I have no defense for it. I'm not going to try to construct one." She held his gaze. "I know," she said. "That's not enough. My knowing that you know is not—" "I didn't say it was enough," she said. "I said I know. What you did was what it was. You made choices, and they were wrong, and they hurt me, and understanding why doesn't make them not have happened." She paused. "But I also know that you've spent 2 months since then making different choices. Every day. The food, and the first aid kit, and the unmonitored phone, and the 2 weeks alone in Kyoto." She looked at her hands. "I'm not keeping a ledger. I'm not waiting for the scales to balance. I just know what I've seen." "What have you seen?" he said, as if he genuinely wanted to know, as if the answer was something he needed. She thought about it. "A man trying," she said. "Not perfectly. Not without friction, but trying in the direction of something better than what he was when I met him." She looked up. "I don't know if that's enough. I don't know what enough looks like from here, but it's not nothing." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, "I'd like to be here when they come. If that's... I want to be here." She understood what he was asking. The twins, the birth.
The thing that was coming in approximately 4 months that would change everything again in ways neither of them could fully map. "We have time," she said, "to figure out what that looks like, what's reasonable and what's too much and where the lines are." She looked at him. "But yes, you can be here." Something crossed his face. She had seen many versions of his face over the past 5 weeks. The interrogation face, the calculation face, the controlled face that was on in every public moment. This was different from all of them. This was a face that was not performing anything for anyone, that had let go of the management and was just present in the moment with what the moment contained. He looked like a man who had been running on survival instincts for so long that someone offering him something different had caught him completely off guard. She understood that. She was familiar with that particular surprise. The weeks in Kyoto became months. November turned to December, and December was cold, and the canal sometimes had a thin skin of ice at its edges in the mornings, and she walked anyway because the walking was hers. Min-jae came on weekends. Not every weekend, not as a rule, but often enough that Mrs. Tanaka stopped being surprised by him and started leaving extra portions of whatever she'd made for dinner. He was different here than he was in Seoul. Not a different person. She was not naive enough to believe that environment transformed character, but a different presentation of the same person. He wore ordinary clothes. He walked to the ramen place with her and sat across a small table and ate with the slightly self-conscious focus of someone who is aware they were doing something normal and is unsure of the protocol. He carried groceries from the shop 2 streets over without being asked, because she could no longer carry heavy things comfortably, and he had noticed and done something about it without making a speech. They had arguments, good ones, not the cold hostility of the early weeks, but actual arguments, the kind that required both people to be present and invested. About the trial strategy and her role in it, about what the children would know about how they had come to exist, about the company and what rebuilding it with integrity actually meant when the foundation of it was still, in certain lights, built on things that required looking at honestly. He argued back. He did not fold. He listened when she was making a point. He hadn't considered and updated his position when the point was good, which was the most important thing, that she could see the update happening in real time, that he was not managing her while pretending to listen, but actually changing his mind based on what she said. She trusted him more than she had expected to. She was careful with it. Trust, she had learned in ways she would not soon forget, was not something to be dispersed freely. But what she had built with him was tested and specific and built on evidence rather than assumption, and that made it different from what she had had with Camille, which had been assumption that turned out to be air. The twins came on a Thursday in February, 6 weeks early, because twins rarely kept their appointments, and the labor started at 3 in the morning in the Kyoto house with a jolt of pain that woke her from the deepest sleep she'd had in months. She called out. Not his name exactly, just a sound, the instinctive sound that leaves the body when it understands that something is happening and it cannot be alone in it. He was there in 40 seconds. He had been staying in the house for the past 3 weeks at her request, not pressured into it, asked, because the due date had been approaching and Mrs. Tanaka's medical knowledge was limited to very good soup. He came through the door and took in the situation and made exactly 1 phone call, and then he sat on the edge of her bed and took both her hands and said, with the flat practicality that was one of the most reliable things about him, "The car will be here in 6 minutes. Breathe." She breathed. The hospital was 20 minutes away. The drive was the longest 20 minutes of her life, which had already had some strong competition in that category. He held her hand the whole way and said almost nothing, and the almost nothing was exactly right. Not false reassurance, not platitudes, just presence. A hand that did not let go. The birth took 7 hours. Not clean or cinematic, nothing about it was smooth or managed. It was labor, which is the most honest thing a body can do, which does not care about composure or dignity, or the fact that the man sitting beside you through every contraction was the same man who slammed you against a wall 5 months ago and called you a liar. She thought about that, between the worst of it. She thought about how strange the architecture of the human experience was, that you could start somewhere and end somewhere so far from it that the starting point was barely recognizable, and that the journey between them could be made of things you would never have chosen and could still somehow be yours. The girl came first. At 8:47 in the morning, with the particular furious volume of someone who has opinions about the world she's just arrived in.
The boy came 11 minutes later, slightly quieter, eyes already open in the dazed and searching way of someone trying to get their bearings. She held one in each arm, and they were very small and very real, and her body was exhausted in a way that had no comparison, and she was not crying. She was too far past the edge of ordinary emotion for crying. She was just present, completely, entirely, without management, present. Min-jae stood near the foot of the bed. He had not let go of her hand until the nurses required him to. Now he stood and looked at the two people that had come from the worst night of both their lives, from an operation built on cruelty and calculation, from a situation that had been designed to use and discard both of them, and what was on his face in that moment was something that had never been there in any of the 5 months she had known him. It was not composure, it was not calculation, it was not the management of a difficult situation. He sat down in the chair next to her. He did not ask. He did not perform. He just sat in the chair and looked at his children and the woman who had carried them through everything, and the expression on his face was the plain, uncomplicated face of someone who has arrived somewhere real. "They don't have names yet," she said. "No," he agreed. "I've been thinking about it." "So have I." A pause. "I didn't want to presume." She looked at him. "Tell me." He told her. She listened. She thought about it. She suggested adjustments. He considered them with the seriousness he brought to things that mattered. They went back and forth for 20 minutes with 2 newborns between them and the winter light coming through the hospital window, and arrived eventually at 2 names that were neither of theirs in origin but belonged to both of them in the way that things created jointly do. The girl, Lena. The boy, Chae-won. She said the names out loud. They fit. She said them again to the small faces that were already trying to figure out how to keep their eyes open, and felt the names settle into something permanent. 6 months later, on a warm Seoul afternoon in August, Min-jae arranged something small at the same office building where the justice of the peace had stood in front of 2 lawyers and a PR photographer and called them married. There was no photographer this time. No lawyers, except one who was a friend of director Shin's, who had become something like a friend of hers over the course of the trial preparations. Park was there. Mrs. Tanaka had come from Kyoto, which had surprised and moved her in equal measure. The Kang Industries building was behind them, but they were in a small garden beside it that she had not known existed, tucked between the tower and the next building, with old trees and a low stone wall and afternoon light. Min-jae had asked her 2 weeks earlier in the Kyoto kitchen the way he asked things now, directly, without performance, with the specific vulnerability of someone who has learned that performing certainty is less useful than being honest about what he wanted. "I'd like to do it again," he said. "Properly this time. If you want to. If you don't, I understand, and what we are is what we are, and that's enough. But if you want to." She had looked at him for a long time. She had thought about everything she knew about him, the real things, not the calculated ones. She had thought about what was enough and what wasn't, and she had thought about the words she had said in this kitchen 2 weeks after the twins were born. That trust built on evidence was different, and that different meant something. "Ask me properly," she said. He had. In the garden in August, with Lena and Chae-won in the arms of Mrs. Tanaka and director Shin's lawyer friend, Min-jae took her hands the way he had once taken them for a camera and held them this time for her and said the things he meant without anyone watching except the people who had earned the right to be there. She said yes. Not because the past was resolved. It wasn't, fully, and she was honest enough to know that full resolution was a story people told rather than a state that actually existed. Not because every wound was healed or every accusation forgotten or every moment in the locked room on the 44th floor undone. She said yes because she knew who was standing in front of her, because she had built that knowledge from the ground up, from evidence and friction and arguments and ramen and 2 weeks alone by a canal and 7 hours of labor and 20 minutes negotiating the names of 2 people who would grow up not knowing how much of the world had tried to prevent them from arriving. She said yes because trust that is built is different from trust that is assumed, and because she had done the work of building it and she knew what it was made of. She said yes because the man holding her hands was not the man who had grabbed her collar in a corporate suite and called her a liar, and not because he had been replaced but because he had changed, and she had watched the change happen in real time, day by day, without fanfare. She said yes because her children were 6 months old, And the world they were going to grow up in was going to be better than the one she'd been handed, because she and the man across from her were going to make it so. Not out of sentiment, but out of the specific stubbornness of two people who had survived something that was designed to destroy them and had ended up, against all reasonable odds, standing in a garden in August with their hands linked and the weight of everything behind them and the uncharted, imperfect, entirely possible future ahead. Lena made a sound from Mrs. Tanaka's arms, something between a complaint and a statement, the sound of a 6-month-old asserting her position on whatever was currently happening. Jae-won, hearing his sister, made a similar sound with slightly different inflection, as if offering commentary. Min-jae glanced at them over Nyla's shoulder. Something happened on his face that she had come to love, the specific shift that the children produced in him. The way every layer of managed presentation simply fell away in their presence and left behind a man who was, in those moments, purely and without strategy, happy. She followed his gaze. Then she looked back at him. "They're going to be a lot of work," she said. "Yes," he said. "You know that, right? It's not going to be clean or easy or... You've seen what 2 months looks like. It's going to be that for years." "I know," he said. And then, with the particular honesty that was the thing she had come to trust most about him, "I want that. All of it. Even the parts I don't know how to do yet." She looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded once, the way you nod when something lands true. Behind them, Lena made another sound, more emphatic this time. Jae-won joined in, and Mrs. Tanaka laughed her radio broadcast laugh, and Director Shin's lawyer friend said something in Korean that made Park actually smile for what Nyla was fairly certain was the first time in recorded history. Min-jae kept hold of her hand. She kept hold of his. The afternoon light moved through the old trees in the garden, dappling the stone wall and the ground beneath their feet, and the city continued its ordinary Wednesday around them, unknowing, unhurried, the immense machinery of daily life running its course without pausing for anything as small and as enormous as two people standing in a patch of light with their broken and rebuilt lives in their hands, deciding, again and finally, what to make of